Good Monday morning, everybody. Welcome on into a brand new week and today's episode of FreightWaves Now. I'm Kaylee here with Anthony Smith.
That's right, on this Monday edition.
Get to start the week off with a bang with John Kingston talking about emerging energy prices. And we'll also talk with Mike Baudendistel about the CPG world. But first, we're going to get to the carrier update before our top story, because our top story is going to deal with some changes happening in the rail industry with Joanna Marsh, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Right now, we're going to go over to the carrier update.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to The Wall for this wonderful carrier update. I'm Thomas Watson. Joining me here is Donnie Gilbert. Donnie, looks like fuel prices are indeed all the rage this fine morning.
All right, so it's not as bad as what it looks like, but over the past few days, we've seen, actually probably over the past 4 days, we've seen diesel fuel prices go up, but it's only gone up 2 cents. But looking down here in the red line, this is our rack price. Since about the 5th of January, it's gone up nearly 50 cents. So they've absorbed most of this impact of the increase of the fuel, of the wholesale prices. But right now, our split has gotten to a level that's low enough that if this continues to rise, it is going to start pushing this back up.
And especially thinking about the racks, is this something where we're just seeing, like, in your experience, January, where it's a little bit slower, we're using the oil for other things, or is this something where there's some other stuff going on?
Well, for one, you also got to remember that in the wintertime, diesel fuel does compete with home heating oil. It's very close to the same thing. So as these cold weather and these storms roll through, the Midwest, the Northeast, a lot more home heating fuel is going to be used as well. So that can also help impact these prices. But let's go to the next chart here. Let me show you what's really put it together. Me and Tony talked a lot about how when we get in between that 90 cent and 110 mark on this wholesale to retail spread, that's when you start seeing those fuel prices start going back up. Now, we've seen it react a little bit differently this year because there's been a lot of volatility and stations have held their prices a lot higher. Well, in this case, they've been holding it. The volatility went down and they've allowed it to come down. They've been lowering their prices as well, doing a great job. But now we're down to 109. So we get to around about that dollar mark, they're really going to start pushing those fuel prices back up. And if it continues to rise, then we could be back up at $5 a gallon in no time at all.
That's what I was curious about. It looks like we're almost in the Goldilocks zone now after all that volatility. I do wonder if we'll see also maybe stations undercut. With diesel, it's not like you're always across the street trying to compete like traditional fuel. So this is definitely worth keeping an eye on for sure if that spread continues or if it opens back up and prices are rising.
Yeah, these are truck stops. They're not fuel stations, or they're not gas stations. You'll see differences sometimes of 20, 30 cents of a truck stop and then a gas station right beside it selling diesel. They're a little bit more harsh than what some of these service stations are. All right, let's check out what our NTI is today. Moving forward here, blue line here, this is our NTID, this is the actual. We dropped down to $2.52 as of really yesterday. And we've seen this big decline here start out since, of course, the end of the year. And it's just slowly worked its way down to now at $2.52. What we're seeing here is as well, you can see that dry van contracted rates here in orange, they've dropped down, going back up slightly right now, but we have these ups and downs, so you might see it go back up slightly. Reefer here in green, it's dropped down and it's picked back up here the last 3 or 4 days. Of course, these are 14 days behind where we currently are. So we do expect these to drop back down, but we've seen a lot more of an increase here on reefer than what I've expected. So this is going to be one to watch out for. Now, traditionally, Thomas, reefer is more expensive than dry van. So are we going to see this continue to drop down and reefer get back above dry van this month, or is it going to take it all the way to February when reefer normally starts to rebound?
We'll definitely keep an eye on it, Donnie. Thank you so much. That's going to be it for this first part of the carrier update. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our first guest.
All right, guys, thank you for that first carrier update. And joining us for our top story of the morning, we've got Joanna Marsh, who, of course, has her finger on the pulse of the intermodal and rail space, talking about what's going on when Union Pacific talks about crew sizes and embargoes. Joanna, what's happening in that space?
Yeah, there's just lots of stuff going on, and it's not necessarily like on purpose. It's just everything just kind of comes together at the same time. It rains, it pours, I guess. So you have 8 lawmakers from the U.S. House of Representatives, 7 Republicans and 1 Democrat from Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, contacting the Surface Transportation Board, asking them if they can do something about the embargoes that Union Pacific has recently placed, starting in late December, and they have continued. And the Union Pacific says that the embargoes are weather related. It's just been a really bad spat of weather lately, and but the lawmakers say, well, this Union Pacific has been able to handle bad weather before. What's going on. So they're asking that. So they sent a letter to STB Chairman Marty Oberman saying, "Can you please look into it?" Essentially, or can you arrange something where stakeholders and UP can come in and kind of talk about this? And so we'll see what Chairman Oberman says. So that's one thing, and then you have another thing happening with Smart TD, which is the the train conductors, and Union Pacific. And Union Pacific had, still probably has plans to conduct a pilot program where they would, in a certain area, and this isn't, why, it's just a pilot, so it's just kind of testing it out. They would have testing sort of what they call like a ground space conductor, so normally there's in the locomotive cab, there's a train engineer and a train conductor. And so they're both together, and they're looking at what if you take the conductor out, so the engineer still drives the train, but what if you take the conductor out and have the conductor, which they call an expediter, be on the ground. So if there's an incident or if there's something that needs to be looked at during the train, as the train's on the network, that conductor can drive over to the train and see what's going on. And so Union Pacific wants to do a test pilot on that, just to see, would that work? In the test pilot, they would actually still have a conductor on the train, just to compare the two. Operations, but the Smart TD representatives say, hey, we haven't negotiated this yet, so this isn't really happening right now. So really right now they're at the negotiation stage, Union Pacific and the unions, and I feel like I've just spewed out a lot of words. So if you have any questions about it, let me know.
Definitely, Joanna. So jumping into this, what would be the order of operations that things would have to happen and for this to be successful?
Sorry, so this for the one-person cruise, you mean? Or
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what order have to? So the negotiations will have to occur at the local level. So it would be between sort of state and local representatives of the Smart TD union and Union Pacific, and but then there's a So I don't know I confess I don't know the finer points of the union negotiations, but so there definitely has to be that happening. I don't know as of now, like whether it would reach the national level. On another sort of twist to things, at the national level, you do have a proposed rulemaking from the Federal Railroad Administration about train crew sizes, and that proposed rule is saying that that every freight railroad must have at least 2 members on board, so an engineer and conductor, and that's that's a rule that the unions are really pushing for, and that proposed rule, that idea has actually been around for a while. It was. It was, I guess, 2 things. One is that it was sort of like a campaign promise by President Joe Biden saying, hey, we'll make sure we have, 2-person crews at least. So you have that, but then you also have, several years ago, this rule was being considered, and then it got put off the table by former Administrator Ron Battery, who who had served under President Donald Trump. And so, that issue came off the table, and so it's back on again. And so you have this local issue going on with Union Pacific and the unions, and you have the wider issue with the federal government looking into this issue.
And so with this one-person train crew, is this really just trying to be a cost-cutting measure for these freight railroads, or is it kind of dependent on railroad to railroad who's pushing it and who's not?
Yeah, I get the impression that right now it's railroad to railroad. And of course, this wouldn't be, I would assume so. I can't say, but I would assume that it would also depend on which routes and in which lanes. I think another factor to take in is that the Short Line Association is against the rule because they represent smaller railroads, both financially and from operationally. And so some of the sort of mom and pop short lines have been running one-person crews, because they only go 70 miles or something. They go a small amount, so going on as well. But I had another point, and I can't remember what it was. But what was your next question? I guess it'll come back to me, perhaps.
Sure. Can you talk to a little bit more about what's going on with the embargo situation with Union Pacific?
Sure. So, Union Pacific has an interesting time with embargoes. They have placed embargoes, because of weather-related incidents, or the wildfires in California, or bad weather or flooding that has happened in the Midwest. That use of embargoes has increased significantly within the last year or two, and as a way to mitigate congestion on the network. And so Union Pacific has actually gotten a lot of flack from the Surface Transportation Board and from rail shippers about the embargoes, and with STB calling Union Pacific to a hearing, I think in December, and Union Pacific said, okay, we will put on hold our embargo program, but then of course you have this bad weather that has happened, and then of course related, just a lot of service issues still going on. You did have a recent issue with a California chicken feed processor chicken processor with getting animal feed delivered. That was Foster Farms, and that actually went before the Surface Transportation Board, and the STB issued an order saying Union Pacific and Foster Farms, you got to get working on getting animal feed to the chickens, so the chickens will be fed. And so they've been able to work that out. But yeah, just the whole rail service issue is still a big issue, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen, because Union Pacific actually has its fourth quarter earnings call tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what questions the Wall Street analysts ask them, and sort of how, the response to everything.
It certainly will be interesting. And of course, we'll follow up with you as this situation continues to develop. Joanna, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Right now, we're going to head over to Kaylee Nix, who has our first look of today's headlines.
All right, Anthony, thanks for that. Here's a look at your top stories from FreightWaves.com this morning. Warehouse labor cost inflation has been slightly easing in the recent months, even though warehouse capacity remains tight, at least according to GXO Logistics. The contract logistics giant CFO Baris Oran said that his company's labor costs are easing across the world. Labor inflation is decelerating as a percentage. And along with that, there's more availability of warehouse workers. The U.S. market sits 2 to 3 quarters ahead of Europe in this moderation timeline, even as warehouse space remains tight. Prologis, the world's largest logistics real estate developer, said that it estimates rents will rise by more than double digits levels this year. Houston-based cloud platform Macrofab has raised $42 million in a capital raise led by Foundry. This latest raise brings the total for the company to $82 million, which will put it in the front of companies looking to overhaul supply chains in North America. Macrofab serves the contract manufacturing industry by getting electronic products from prototype to high-scale production and includes a network of over 100 factories in North America currently. And Western United States Railroad BNSF plans to spend more than $3.96 billion in capital and maintenance projects in 2023 in order to bring safety and reliability to its network. President and CEO Katie Farmer said the capital plan reflects a growth mindset and commitment to having capacity and equipment to support customers in their needs. $2.85 billion of that total will go towards maintenance of current BNS network locations, and $402 million will go to acquiring new equipment like rail ties. For those headlines and more, you can head on over to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe to stay updated. You can head on over to tv.freightwaves.com or download our app for the full FreightWaves experience. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with a look at weather, and we'll chat with John Kingston. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of weather for you here on this morning. We're starting off the week with a look at a pretty robust winter storm setting up that will impact pretty much everybody from the desert Southwest all the way up to the Central Plains and eventually into the Great Lakes area as well. Starting off with the organization portion of the storm, and that's what we're looking at right now. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. Currently, it's not looking too impressive on our radar signatures, but we are watching this storm set up right across the intersection of Arizona and New Mexico right now. So we've got a lot of lingering snowfall going on across the desert Southwest, as well as some light rain and mixed precipitation going on. Cold air is really well in place already across New Mexico and Arizona, leading them to get some decent snowfall amounts there. And because of that, we do have winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings, hard freeze warnings in place as well all across the southern parts of those two states. Heading further out to the east, we've got winter storm warnings in place along that I-40 corridor, moving from Albuquerque on into the West Texas area, the Texas Panhandle. Winter weather advisories in place as well for Amarillo, including that I-40 corridor, and then down I-27 towards the Lubbock area. Light snowfall is going on right now in some of these places. The accumulating stuff will start moving in later on this afternoon into tonight. And because of that, again, do have winter weather advisories in place along those North Texas areas. Dallas-Fort Worth Metro currently excluded from any advisories, but we can't rule out some flurries here or there. Same thing as we move out into the Oklahoma area, Oklahoma City specifically. We do have winter storm watches in place for them. And again, it can't rule out some flurries or two, but the ground temperatures are fairly warm there, so we're not expecting a ton of accumulating snow in places throughout Oklahoma. Out towards West Texas and New Mexico, however, though, we do have that colder air in place, so we could see accumulating snow of about 1.5 to 2 inches in some places. Most grassy areas will end up with at least a dusting or so tonight and into tomorrow morning. Travel impacts from this going to be pretty limited today, but that storm will ramp up and bring some more major impacts to the central parts of the plains later on this week. We'll talk about that coming up in our next checks of weather. Right now, we're going to toss things over to Isaiah Buchanan. He's got our social roundabout this morning.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and we're starting things off talking about Elon Musk. Now, he's at trial for a tweet that came out that he tweeted out in 2018. Now, that tweet said, "Am considering taking Tesla private for $420 a share. Funding secured." Now, that tweet, he's going through the San Francisco federal court right now. And after he tweeted that out in 2018, the shares were highly volatile for a few weeks after that. The SEC even charged him and the company Tesla with civil securities fraud after that tweet, and both he and the company had to pay that agency $20 million. Even more backlash from that tweet, the shareholders of Tesla filed a class action lawsuit against him for that, and so he's had a lot of backlash from this one tweet, but Musk, during the trial on Friday, said that it is hard to link Tesla's stock prices to that tweet. So we'll continue to keep you updated on what's going on with the Tesla trial out in San Francisco as we learn more information. Now, switching things up, are you a little desperate to find love? Because Tinder is trying to find those people, because obviously they're going to be trying to find their subscription that's going to cost $500 a month. Now, it's not confirmed that this is going to happen. They're actually just trying to gauge the interest of how many people would actually be willing to pay the $500 a month. And that actually turns out to be about $6,000 a year. They haven't announced what kind of features or anything like that would be on the subscription, but they already have several subscriptions already. They have their regular service, and then there's the Tinder Plus, Tinder Gold, and Tinder Platinum. So $500 a month, that's a little steep. I know I can't afford that. I mean, I'm desperate to find love too, but not $500 a month, desperate. Kaylee, Anthony, any thoughts on the new Tinder subscription potentially?
I mean, at this point, that's cheaper than a carton of eggs, so might as well.
And ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Isaiah Buchanan, single and looking for love.
You know, Anthony, we're coming up on Valentine's Day. We're getting into that space. So if any of our lucky ladies out there are watching, Isaiah is a great guy, right? I've known him for 4.5 years. He's great. He cut his hair recently. Maybe you can convince him to grow it back. I don't know.
I'm a fan of the hair.
Send him a DM.
Maybe I don't have much to speak, but I'm a fan of his haircut, and I'm a fan of Isaiah Buchanan, and I am a fan of this next person that we have on, because we have our editor-at-large, the one and true energy market expert, if there ever was one, John Kingston.
Absolutely. And we're talking a little bit about what's going on with our long-term energy trends. John, thank you for joining us. You're down in Miami. Can you hear us over the sound of the waves in the ocean right now?
The ocean's pretty far away from where I am, and yes, I can hear you. And sorry for the technology problems this morning that are requiring me to go audio only.
It is all good. It happens. As long as we got your voice, it's all that matters. Let's talk a little bit about energy trends coming up this year in the long term. Obviously, we've seen kind of this volatile energy market through really the last 2.5 years. Are we looking at continuing that volatility through 2023?
Oh, I think oil markets will always be in volatility. I can't really remember any time that it's been been stable. I mean, going back 30 years ago, it was relatively stable, but But certainly, I expect a lot of volatility this year. When you look at all the factors that are in the market, you still got the whole role of Russia as a supplier and what that'll be given sanctions. You have volatility in economic markets, which will impact the price of oil. Oh yeah, it's going to be volatile.
And John, recently the International Energy Agency put out a report. Can you tell us a little about some of the details that were outlined there?
Yeah, I thought the report was relatively bullish. I know that it came a couple of days after the Energy Information Administration's short-term energy outlook, known as the SEO, which was pretty bearish. They viewed prices as going down this year. Look, let's say up front that the biggest factor in here will be whether there's any kind of a recession, because a recession would drive down demand and you would end up having lower prices. So let's just get that out of the way. But I think when you put other things into the mix, there's a lot more pointing to higher prices than there are lower prices. First of all, the International Energy Agency does what's known as the OPEC call, and you get it by you estimate world demand, you estimate non-OPEC supply, you estimate a category of OPEC output called NGLs like propane and butane, which doesn't fluctuate that much. And what's left is the amount of oil that OPEC needs to produce to keep the oil markets in balance. And right now we're producing about OPEC is producing a little over 29 million barrels a day. And they've got a pretty bullish case for the fourth quarter in which the OPEC call is 31.4. Well, OPEC has never produced that. Even prior to the pandemic, it has never produced that. So I'm not really sure what the case is for a bearish market. To me, the world is struggling to keep up with supply. The world is struggling to keep up with demand, which continues to rise at a pretty good pace. There's a Goldman Sachs report out this morning seeing Chinese growth next year or this year at 5.4%. That's higher than most other estimates. The Chinese are the world's biggest importer, so they're a very large factor in the market, and their inactivity because of their lockdowns have been a real reason, one of the real reasons why we've had kind of a softer price here now, probably for the last 6 months or so. So I'm sorry, I just don't see the case for lower prices except for a recession. That's the biggest of all. That would be a major hit on demand, and that would be a major bearish factor.
That China component is something that is really interesting as well, because when people really talk about the geopolitical concerns around the oil market, I feel like a lot of the discussion is very heavily skewed towards Russia, their production, and what they play. But we know that China is still facing this kind of uncertain future when it comes to COVID. And even though their restrictions are easing, the country is now having these really massive waves of COVID illness. So even though they may not be required now by government regulations, people are just sick and they're not producing and they're not being able to get back to work, right? How much of a player or a factor is the China situation versus the Russia situation right now?
Well, I mean, the Russia situation, they've mostly kind of normalized their production as they found new routes, new customers to get their oil. So their oil output isn't that much down than it was before the invasion of Ukraine. You do have the EU ban on imports of products that are coming up in about 2 weeks. And we'll see if they can reroute those supply lines and find new customers for that. And we may end up getting kind of like the best of both worlds, where the Russians start getting a lot less money for their oil because they've got to absorb a lot higher freight rates. So which is bigger, Russia or China? I'd say China right now is the more unknown. Russia has managed, as I said, to find new crude customers. They will probably manage to find new product customers as well. Whereas Chinese demand, boy, we just really don't know what that's going to be. I will say this, that I don't want to pretend to be an epidemiologist, but the way these things go, that you tend to have a really huge surge, and it looks like a huge surge in COVID cases, and then it burns out relatively quickly. Of course, the sad thing is then you have a lot of people who are less sick or dead, but that is a very real possibility that after this massive surge they're going through, you'll have a degree of that natural immunity that they've never had in that country because of the way they handled it. So you can imagine by the end of the year, Chinese, even as you're getting ready for a new winter surge, that Chinese demand will pick up considerably.
And John, can you talk to some of the other aspects that are really impacting prices right now? Of course, we're looking at the recent or current winter weather. It's been a little bit warmer. Of course, Kaylee can speak to that, but that seems to be something that has also been a saving grace for prices.
Oh, that's been massive. That has been absolutely massive. The Europeans in particular did put a lot of natural gas into inventory. In October, the amount of heating oil that they had in inventory was, like 90% of normal. And I shouldn't say that the amount of natural gas they had in inventory was like 90% of normal. They really did their job getting ready. And then you have this winter in which, the Alps are bare. So in terms of helping us to avoid a real spike, the weather has been a gigantic bearish factor. And I think most consumers would say thank you for the weather.
Yeah, no kidding. It's definitely been a well above average winter, even though we've had these kind of spells of cold or wintry mix. We're looking at continuing that as we move through the end of January and into February as well. Overall, John, when we're looking at probably what to expect for 2023, if you are maybe a fleet fuel manager, if you're a fuel buyer and you're looking to kind of put out a plan together, what are the top 3 things that you would give them as far as advice goes, planning for how to handle the markets for the year?
Well, first of all, I'd say the overall economic situation. I mean, if you have a recession, the price of oil is going to go down. You can't do anything about the weather. I do think that there's been some significant analysis that the diesel margin right now, which is basically the margin of diesel over crude, which in the past year or so has completely blown out to levels way above history. I'd say that in that case, the forecasts are that that's not going to retreat that much. So I think that you would operate under the assumption that diesel relative to crude will continue to be elevated. So if you're doing some kind of a spreadsheet where you look at the price of crude, I think that diesel is going to snap back to its earlier spreads against crude. You should not make that assumption. Diesel is going to continue to be elevated relative to crude.
And John, of course, if people want to be able to find more of your content, can you tell us a little bit about your show that you have?
Yeah, Drilling Deep drops every Friday at 3:30. 3:30 or 2:30. 2:30. And still working on this week's guest.
There we go, John. All right, thank you so much for joining us. You are down in Miami, as you mentioned. Any sneak peeks on what you're doing down there, or just vacation?
Yeah, well, it's not a big secret. I'm speaking at the S&P Global Commodities Insight Aluminum Conference. S&P Global Commodities Insight houses the former Platts business, where I worked for almost 30 years. And in fact, I chaired this conference like 24 years ago. It's great to be back, but I'm going to be telling the FreightWaves story, talking about markets and giving them some examples of what can be done in sonar.
Awesome, John. Well, thank you so much for your time this morning. And of course, we're looking forward to your next Drilling Deep episode, and we'll follow up with you as some of this changes in energy continues to play out.
Thank you.
All right, and of course, you can catch Drilling Deep, as John mentioned, right here on FreightWaves TV and listen to it on the podcast player of your choice. Also, head on over to FreightWaves.com and read some of John Kingston's awesome articles. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live. Welcome back, everybody, to this second carrier update on this fine Monday morning. I'm Thomas Watson. Joining me is Donnie Gilbert, and we're looking at today a little bit of reefer tender volumes.
Yeah, so here in the blue line, we got reefer outbound tender rejection or outbound tender volume index. And the yellow, we have the tender rejection rates. So as we entered into January here, we had, the end of the peak here as we rebounded from the holidays. We saw volume start to decline there for a little bit. But here over the past, week or so, we've seen volumes actually start to bounce back to about where they were at the end of December. Now, rejection rates continue to go down. We got a couple of things pushing rejection rates down. One is the excess demand, excess capacity in the markets, and also these high diesel fuel rates. They're getting better rates they're contracted with the fuel surcharge versus the spot market. So this has kind of pushed the rejection rates down. But here, as volumes pick back up here, we saw a little bit of a recovery, just minute. But we'll see, we can see how rejection rates are a little bit more responsive right now in the reefer market than they are the dry van market. So if reefer can maybe flip this around and get some more volumes pumping through the system, more or less capacity in the reefer sector, then this could actually bring rejection rates back maybe fairly quickly.
We would hope to see that. We definitely could see that kind of seasonal volatility here moving into the holidays and New Year. But it's always fascinating because, even in times of economics, people still want their CPG. They still want their frozen, Tyson frozen chicken nuggets don't transport themselves.
Yeah, but part of this could be some of this weather that's been moving through here, and things that would normally ship on a regular dry van are now needing to be shipped on a reefer to keep them from freezing. So that protect from freeze will be kicking in, especially as we see these other storms cross the U.S. here that Kaylee was just talking about. So keep an eye on that. That could also tighten the markets. We go to the next chart here, and we'll look at their average tender lead times. And we see them just up just a little bit to 4.37. They normally run about that 4.1, 4.2. So we know there might be something going on here. So this might give reefer carriers the opportunity, if they're in some of these areas, to try to start pressuring and pushing some of the rates up just a little bit. And they may see that these shippers are more responsive to paying a little bit higher rates right now, due to everything that's going on with, weather, whatnot, and under a little bit of pressure here.
And it's definitely worth watching as well. Vans normally between 2.5 and 3 right now in outbound tender lead times. And so not only are you getting it further in advance, but curious as well, modal swap. We talk about, open deck carriers will swap to either like a dry van or a reefer. Reefers may swap to a different mode. Curious to see if rates and situations improve, that we may see that situation where it makes a little more sense to pull out the old reefer.
Reefer can switch to dry van by merely cutting the unit off. So a little bit easier. One more chart here, looking at the changes in rejection rates. Just because we see rejection rates kind of going down and steady now, we still have a lot in this area that increased through the Midwest, and it kind of got balanced out by the decrease here in the Midwest. So we do have a lot of rejection rates in each market going up and going down, going up and going down. So you need to actually check. Just because you see the national index not moving very much or very steady doesn't mean that nothing is happening. You need to check out your maps and keep an eye on your maps, and you see where rejection rates jumped, I believe, 7% in Memphis. And you see other markets with some pretty large volumes where rejection rates have increased. And then, of course, out here in the plains, you see where they've gone down. So don't just look at the national index and say, hey, nothing's happened. You better check your markets out.
Always check the markets, always check the map. Donnie, thank you so much. That's going to be it for this second carrier update as well. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our next guest.
All right, guys, thank you for that. And of course, we'll have more coming up in our second hour. Right now, we're going to welcome in our next guest. We've got Mike Baudendistel, our CPG and rail expert, host of the Stockout, writer of the Stockout newsletter, talking to us a little bit about the push to reduce sugar. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Sure, good to see you guys.
Feels like they're trying to healthify everything, right? And now no more sugar. What's going on?
Well, I think we need it based on some of the things I'm seeing with the obesity rates and those things. It's like you think back 20 years ago and there was this big push to get rid of trans fats and reduce fat. And, at the time, I think the obesity rate in the United States was 35%. And now in 20 years, it's gone from 35% to 45%. So something's not working. And, the UK is really making a big push here, too, because they feel bad that they are doing worse with health than the rest of Europe. So there's been some regulatory changes there in terms of not being able to market certain sugary treats at the checkout counter and various other things in terms of advertising. Can't restrictions on advertising that would go to children. But basically, there's all these sort of regulations. They're actually putting new labels on the front of CPGs, like a stoplight, so you can really quickly see whether a certain product is high in sugar or salt. And what's been interesting here, what last week what caught my attention is there was a really good article from Food Business News, which is one of the things I read in order to get ideas for the Stockout, is they put out an article talking about some of the startups that are looking to reduce sugar in consumer packaged goods without compromising on taste. So I can go through a couple of these. They're pretty interesting. There's one company called Domatic. They have a product called Incredo Sugar. It's designed to improve the efficiency of sugar delivery to sweet taste receptors that enhances the perception of sweetness in food or beverages. The idea is to reduce sugar by 30 to 50% without compromising taste or texture. So that was interesting. There's another company called the Supplant Company, which creates fiber-rich sugars by using specific fiber-rich parts of crops. Those would be like stems, stalks, husks, and cobs. So that's a little bit easier for me to wrap my head around. You just use the part of the crop that has more fiber. There's another company called Bonumose Inc., designed to reduce the amount of sugar, actually reduce the sugar by using this alternative called tagatose, which is about 90% is Swedish sugar. And the reason it's not used is that it is expensive, but they have a method to reduce the cost of this sugar alternative, which is sort of rare in, sort of rarely found. But they have some method to do that. Don't really understand the specifics there. But what was interesting also is that Hershey and big sugar marketing giant ASR Group partnered in 2018 to co-lead an equity investment in that company. So it does seem like that adds a lot of credibility to that. So there's various startups that trying to reduce sugar without compromising on taste. That sort of corresponds to this recent trend in CPG where foods that target healthy alternatives seem to have been performing better, and those that are kind of at a premium price point actually doing pretty well. So it is something that consumers are willing to pay a premium for. Of course, there's a lower tech way to cut sugars. That's just to stop eating Pop-Tarts.
Absolutely. And Mike, what's really interesting about this is, of course, we know that most of the sugar that is put into these foods is either a form of high fructose corn syrup right now, or some type of sugar derivative that isn't traditionally like the cane sugar that we were used to seeing, right? We in America, our food system has really moved away to more of this processed in these CPG goods. What does it look like as far as companies having to alter their supply chain when you're talking about moving to some of these sugar alternatives? Are we looking at now having to build out a completely extensive supply chain that's completely based around alternative sugars, not processing with high fructose corn syrup, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think there's still going to be a lot of the use of those high fructose corn syrups based on how cost effective they are and based on existing formulas. So I think that some of these alternatives I'm talking about are going to be niche products when they make their way into the formulas. So I don't know that there's going to be a big overhaul, but maybe just different classes of products where they're trying to get out, the sugar. So I think that's a good, question and something to keep in mind. I mean, they also noticed that there's just more CPGs that are trying to create new products that eliminate a lot of the sugars, like a lot of the energy drinks, which are super high in sugar. That might be the worst sugar offender. Those are coming out with lower sugar alternatives, or some companies are actually sort of spinning that their energy drinks are healthy, which I'm not sure I really believe that. And then Pepsi is launching a new zero sugar soda that's supposed to compete well with Coke Zero, which they feel like they're have just a really sort of poor market share when compared against. So it's something to keep in mind. But does seem like sugar kind of persona non grata right now.
I am an avid Celsius drinker, and I can say they market themselves as healthy. I don't necessarily know if I buy into it. Like, I understand I'm probably like frying my organs, but that's fine, whatever. If it feels better than drinking like a straight up Monster. But when we talk about this, and now you've got these companies taking the opportunity to introduce the new products, do we run the risk of getting product overload for the consumers and then maybe getting product fatigue and seeing some of them fall flat?
Yeah, it does sort of go contrary to what we've seen a lot in CPG, which is eliminating the number of SKUs, or at least reducing the number of SKUs. So the big CPG companies are taking a look at their portfolio and saying, well, these are the ones that really that move quickly. And if we get rid of these lower performing SKUs, those customers are just going to gravitate to this other similar SKU that's probably more profitable anyway. So you're seeing companies like Nestle's been really big on that. They have a snappy name for it. It's like cut the tail to move the head, which is a silly slogan, but maybe a good strategy.
And Mike, can you talk to a little bit more about that price aspect again? Because you touched on it, and it's something that I'm definitely intrigued about, because I'm thinking about, me growing up in Brooklyn when I was younger, going to the corner store, bodega. I look around at all the options. None of them were really healthy for me. As you mentioned, this is going to be a lot of niche products at first, but do you see any way to kind of hasten some of this development, potentially through government support or anything like that? Or is this just going to kind of have to go through some of those conventional methods of, hey, this is going to be a niche product, maybe it'll debut in Whole Foods, and then kind of just move on from there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the government has an interest in improving the health outcomes, especially for children. So I think, they could get some, types of government funding. I mean, Michelle Obama was a big supporter of, healthy eating for children. So there could be those type of things. But, I think a lot of these companies I'm talking about, I mean, they don't seem to have much trouble raising capital just on their own. So that was kind of one of the points I was making in the stock out is this is kind of one of the areas that venture capital is finding value in, because they think this is going to be a longer term trend of cutting sugar. And clearly, people sort of the consumer side, they're sort of on different tracks, right? I mean, some people are really concerned about these higher grocery prices. Other people are still willing to pay for the premium products. And I think that's where more of these products are going to be, targeting. I mean, some of these single serve, beverages, you can buy one beverage that's $4, and maybe the average person isn't going to do that, but plenty of people will. So it does seem like they're raising capital, and this is going to be a big sector that arises.
Definitely seems like an area of growth, as you mentioned, and definitely something that could probably be something that's not just focused on the U.S., even though we definitely need it, but it seems like this is a growing international issue as well that could really be a huge player on the global scale. You mentioned your show Stock Out, and you also have another show. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the other show is PSR, which is People Speaking Rail, and I team up with Joanna Marsh on that. And so we usually have just a plenty of material, either just going through what she's written about or what I'm seeing in the sonar data. So I'll probably touch on those things that we talked about earlier in the show, and like the one-man crew. I've got some thoughts on that. I actually don't think we're going to go to one-man crews. I think we're going to probably have the federal rule that mandates two-man crews, because it's hard to be against safety if you're the Federal Railroad Administration that's in charge of maintaining safety. I do think that the short lines should be excluded from that. I think they're in a completely different business than the Class 1s, and they should have different rules as a result of that. But I do think that other topic, the letter that those lawmakers lawmakers sent to the Surface Transportation Board. I think they might get some traction there. STB's taken some unusual action to preserve the interests of shippers getting good service here the last few months. And, those embargoes are supposed to be for extraordinary weather events, not just because it's cold in the winter.
Awesome. Well, Mike, we're definitely going to be watching for those updates. Of course, you have the stock out a little bit later on today and People Speaking Rail a little bit later on in the week. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll be sure to follow up with you.
Okay, good to see you.
You as well. Right now, we're going to head back over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with our next weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. We touched a little bit on the starting point of the next winter storm looking to impact the central parts of the country. Now let's move on to a little bit of the evolution where we can expect it throughout the next few days. So right now we've got that snow and rain kind of organizing across central New Mexico and down into Arizona. That's going to very quickly eject upwards to the northeast, moving through the central and southern parts of the plains and then eventually into the Midwest up to the Great Lakes area as well. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. And we kind of have a great idea of where this storm is going to go just by watching the line of winter weather advisories already in place. So we do have winter storm watches across from the southern Oklahoma area up through central Arkansas and then eventually into Missouri, up through Indiana, and then into Ohio as well. So some major population centers included in this as well. Oklahoma City's underneath that winter weather advisory. They're seeing a kind of mix of light snow and a little bit of rain going on right now. But we do see St. Louis and then up into Indianapolis included in those winter storm watches. And overall snowfall amounts are going to be limited in their accumulation and impacts, but it's going to be moving pretty quickly. So let's go ahead and flip on your estimated snowfall amounts here. And we can see that we are going to be getting anywhere from about 2.5 to 4 inches most places. This is trending a little bit on the higher side right now. These model accumulations are trending a little bit higher, but really what we're going to be looking at is probably about 4 to 5 in some of those highest accumulations, those local spots. We do see that we've got cold air in place, but there is a lot of warmth on the ground right now, so the warm ground temperatures are going to limit any accumulations. Your grassy areas, your trees, your bushes, tops of cars, things like that will see more than the actual roadways will, but overall still something to watch here throughout the next few days. Higher snowfall amounts expected as the storm picks up steam and then interacts with that colder air in place across Indiana into Ohio, though, so we're going to keep a watch on that as well. We'll touch a little bit more on the continued snowfall going on across the Northeast coming up later on in the show. Right now, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation. This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is Social Roundabout, where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit of entertainment news. This past weekend, Avatar: The Way of Water surpassed $2 billion at the global box office. This is only the 6th film in history to do so. The other 5 include the original Avatar, Avengers Endgame, Titanic, Infinity War, and Star Wars: The Force Awakens. And if you remember, James Cameron also directed the original Avatar and Titanic, so he has 3 of the top 6 highest grossing films ever in movie history, which is a very impressive feat. What's also really impressive about this is Zoe Saldana. She plays in 4 of the top 6 movies at the box office. She's played in Avatar, Avatar: The Way of Water, Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Infinity War. So props to her on being in 4 of the top 6 highest grossing movies ever. Now, switching things up just a little bit, we're going to talk about HBO's new series, The Last of Us. Now, this is one of the better video game adaptations that we've really seen in a long time. There's a lot of scenes that are taken directly from the game and put into the show, which is not something that we get a whole lot. But take a look at this video that shows just how similar the game and the show are.
We're not sick. Sir, we are not sick! I'm sorry. Please don't.
I mean, they hit the nail on the head with that one. Couldn't get any better. I watched the first episode with a group of friends last Monday, and it was fantastic. It kept me captivated throughout the entire hour and 20 minutes. That's how long the first episode was, and I know we're getting together to watch the second episode tonight, so I'm really looking forward to that. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout, but right now I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Anthony, you think you're going to tune in to watch that new show as well?
Already seen both episodes.
Aha, there you go. Love
Yeah.
that. Look at Anthony Smith getting caught up on his culture.
That's right, and I'm a fan of all things horror or video game related, so this one was right up my alley,
There you
and
go.
I'll try not to spoil anything for Isaiah later on today.
All right. Well, Anthony, let's talk a little bit about spoiler alerts, because we're talking about Global Supply Chain Week. It's coming up, and we're not going to spoil any of the prizes for you, but the content can be top notch.
That's right, and if you're involved in any part of the supply chain or anything to do with freight, this event is for you. This is gonna cover every single thing within the supply chain throughout an entire week of conference, and you don't wanna miss it because it's gonna be tons of great content there, and of course, as always, free to register.
We've got ocean, we've got rail, we've got retail, we've got fuel, we've got all of the topics, free entry and giveaway prizes every single day. So don't blow your Q1 budget. Get registered for Global Supply Chain Week and not have to pay a single dollar for it, or not have to pay a single dollar for those great employee swag prizes. Right now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the last 24 hours in freight. We've got our market update on the way.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, kicking off our second hour on this Monday morning with a look at your top stories. Houston-based cloud platform MacroFab has raised $42 million in a capital raise led by Foundry. This latest raise brings the total for the company to $82 million, which will put them in the front of companies looking to overhaul supply chains in North America. MacroFab serves the contract manufacturing industry by getting electronic products from prototype to high-scale production, and it includes a network of over 100 factories across North America. Western U.S. Railroad BNSF plans to spend more than $3.96 billion in capital and maintenance projects this year in order to bring safety and reliability to its network. President and CEO Katie Farmer said the capital plan reflects a growth mindset and a commitment to having capacity and equipment to support customers and their needs. $2.85 billion of that total will go towards maintenance of current BNSF network locations. $402 million will go to acquiring new equipment like rail ties. The White House has touted its handling of the supply chain crisis in a recent blog post, saying the Biden administration has worked hard to bring together crucial pieces to get goods moving and support the American people. Some of the accomplishments mentioned included the agreement brokered to get ports to 24/7 operations, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, and the administration's Trucking Action Plan. Also cited was the New York Stock Exchange's Global Supply Chain Pressure Index, which has global pressures eased 70% from the pandemic. However, in a summarizing note, the White House said that a worsening COVID situation in China could be responsible for the next bout of supply chain tightness. Recent announcements from East Coast ports show just how much ground they gained on the West Coast ports during the pandemic. Sequential month-on-month volume slides are slowing, even at some of the hardest-hit ports in the West Coast. The Port of LA reported 352,046 TEUs handled in December, down 9% year over year, but up 15% from November for the highest monthly total since last August. Charleston and Virginia both saw single-digit month-on-month increases, while Savannah, Georgia was flat for December. However, each of those ports saw double-digit volume increases when compared to December of 2019 pre-pandemic. And ocean visibility provider Terminal 49 announced it has secured a $6.5 million Series A funding round led by Stage 2 Capital and Grand Venture Partners. The company is looking to ramp up its technology offerings to compete in real-time visibility. Company leaders say that supply chain professionals want more than just container tracking abilities. They want to be able to see problems ahead of time on an automated collaboration platform. Terminal 49 started out of a drayage trucking company in California, allowing them a quick in with all U.S. and Canadian ports early in the company's life cycle. Data integrations are coming soon with the Port of Southampton and the London Gateway terminals in the United Kingdom. And for those headlines and more, head on over to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe, and same thing across all of our social medias. We'll go ahead and have one final look at headlines later on in our show, but right now we're going to toss it over to Thomas Wasson. He's here with our next carrier update.
Thanks so much, Kaylee. Welcome back to the wall. Thomas Wasson here. Talking about a little bit of reefer madness earlier, especially the value of paying attention to the map and making sure that you're strategically picking freight going to the right places and not the wrong one.
Yeah, and keep in mind, as Kaylee was talking about, we have a storm coming across that's going to be covering this entire section here. So all your cross, I-20, I-40, I-70, I-80, those could all be affected here. So as we go through this week, be sure and keep an eye on that storm and what direction your trucks are going. You might want to reroute them to avoid those lanes or pick up earlier, pick up later, and work around that storm to where your truck keeps rolling. Maybe run it down here to Atlanta first before you turn it back around and run it across. And that'll give time for DOT to clean the roads up and get through there safely. You do not want to get out there and hit some. A lot of times when these storms come across to the southeast, as she said, the temperatures on the surface are a lot warmer right now, but there's going to be a band of ice somewhere in here that starts before it changes to snow, and you don't want to get caught on that and end up in a wreck. Or you might be a great driver, but you have to watch out for everybody else out there on the roads too, and it might be them that cause you to wreck. So keep that in mind, and of course, as you see these storms like this come across, you might see some responses in different markets in rejection rates where they're turning down those Memphis to Dallas loads right now, or Memphis to Oklahoma City. So you might see some increase in rejection rates in those areas, and that might help spot people looking for spot rates, might push those spot rates up just a little bit.
Exactly. People trying to fill the bucket. Whenever you have weather, it's both a blessing and a curse, because you can get away with the service failures, just blame it on the weather. But at the same time, the problem is, are your drivers going to be driving in the weather? So that's where it gets really tricky. Definitely we'll keep an eye on that area, especially the Ozarks and parts of Arkansas near Springfield, Tulsa, that whole bottom area. You get in some of those neck of the woods and the mountainous areas, and it gets rough.
Yeah. All right, next chart here. We're going to be looking at here tender lead times. It's another thing to keep an eye on. You see here these darker areas, especially up here, Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, and headed out some west into the plains. So you get a lot of extended tender lead times, which again is showing you that maybe some of these shippers are under pressure. If the shippers are under pressure and are booking these loads earlier, then they might be willing to pay a little bit more money as well. Of course, all these areas have been affected by weather, which could also be pushing on this. But again, they're looking for that on-time delivery service, which they may not get during weather events, but they're still trying. So they may pay you just a little bit more, but you also may need to charge a little more because you might be sitting in one of these markets at a fuel station shut down for 24 hours plus as these storms go by. So again, pay attention to the tender lead times as well. It's another key indicator here. We see Atlanta here a little bit extended, Dallas, Texas. Out there in the Pacific Northwest, you see Seattle and Twin Falls showing some elevated tender rejection rates, and also down there in California a little bit.
Definitely. It's one thing that's always fun with that is sometimes if your lead times are too high, they send the wrong ones over, so then your mix is messed up, and then when you have to take your other commitments, it totally messes it up.
One more chart here right quick. Let's see if I can get in here. This is our R-haul, so your head haul index. Another one to look at, the markets in blue, run the blue. These are the markets that are overbooked. If you're a carrier, you want to try to keep your markets, your trucks in these markets that are overbooked. If you have to go to the red, understand, try to get your price back up because those are the markets that are deteriorating. You might either see a issue with rates here or delays.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Donnie. That's going to be it for our third one. Join us. We'll be back for a final one later in the show. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our next guest.
All right, guys, thank you for that. And we've got with us coming up the one, the only Ryan Schreiber from Metafora, talking a little bit about BGSA, what it is and what went on. Ryan, thank you for joining us.
I think we're all glad that I'm the one and only. So thanks for having me. Glad to be here. And,
I think Peter would agree.
Yeah, Peter would wholeheartedly agree. Well, I've always said kind of like one is more than enough. Like if we could get like 75% of me, I think we'd be in good shape. But unfortunately, that's not really an option. So we're working on it. We'll see what happens. But thanks again for having me, guys. It's always fun.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about BGSA 2023. What were kind of the central themes of the event, and really what did you guys learn?
Yeah, it's a really great event. So for anybody who's not familiar with it, BGSA is a conference put on by Ben Gordon. He has Cambridge Capital, which is a PE firm, et cetera. The event is really about 250 very senior executives in transportation, logistics, and supply chain from all over the globe. So it really is a holistic look, kind of at the ecosystem. So the number one overarching takeaway that I was actually somewhat surprised by, given the attendees, because you've got the CEOs of publicly traded companies, you have senior sales leaders, chief revenue officers of large privately held organizations, folks like that. I was actually very surprised by the level of optimism. Certainly there was a conversation about resetting expectations, but the level of optimism that came along with that was really, really impressive. And so, in terms of resetting expectations, it was really just, hey, look, 21 and the first part of 22, those were outlier years, so we can't expect results like that. But we're optimistic that this year is going to look a lot more like, a balanced year. It's not going to look like 2019 as an example. So a lot of optimism was my biggest takeaway.
And Ryan, were there any big points that really kind of led to the optimism? Was it around maybe a soft landing or an aversion of a macroeconomic recession, maybe a resilient consumer, or really just something that was more specific within the supply chain itself?
That's a really, really, really good question. There was a lot of talk about kind of like consumer behavior of Americans, right? Like, this is a consumer-based economy. We don't make a bunch of stuff. We consume a lot of stuff. You still need diapers. You still need you still need eggs. Shout out to eggs, being super expensive these days. But you still need these things as a human being, and so there's a bit of a floor there. That was one part of it, but the biggest, I think, driver for most folks was the realistic take that what drives supply chain, or which trucking domestically, really, right, is supply and demand of drivers. And so there was a lot of talk about, access to drivers, access to trucks, and kind of like the impacts of the soaring truck costs over the last few years, that, there are already sort of indications that maybe we've reached the bottom, maybe there's capacity exiting the market because of truck payments and the like. So, those were sort of the two main reasons for optimism. But look, I want to be clear about this. People were also saying you need to make plans to build a better business, right? You need to look at technology that can help drive a better cost to serve, right? And can lower your overhead. You need to be looking at some of those things to shore up operations, but you don't necessarily need to be a Chicken Little running around and saying the sky is falling.
Absolutely. I think it's funny. That's the second time that we've brought up the price of eggs on today's show in two completely unrelated conversations. But Ryan, earlier in 2022, at the beginning of December, I had a conversation with someone from Iron Spring Ventures, another PE capital firm, talking a little bit about the staying power of freight, and specifically freight tech, when it comes to what capital investors are looking at, right? And how they kind of have this power where, our economy is questionable, but like you said, freight is always going to be there. There's always going to be things that people need because we're this consumer-driven economy. And there was really this underlying theme of, we care about freight tech, so we're going to continue to invest in it. Was that really kind of what you were gathering at this conference as well? Was that kind of theme of like, people still care about it, there's still going to be money going into it?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly. Listen, like, you know, I've lived kind of my career at the intersection of technology and freight, right? Like, I started my career as a freight broker, and I've started some businesses, you know, in the space since then, including brokerages, including venture-backed tech companies, what have you. And so this is something that I've kept my eye on, the narrative around freight tech, for at least 10 years, right? And 10 years ago, no one really spent much time talking about it. You know, somebody talked about what TMS they were on, and they just would shout from the hills about how much they hated their TMS. But that conversation has dramatically changed in the last 10 years, and the pace of change of that conversation has accelerated. I would say pre-pandemic, there was still kind of a broad-based sentiment of, I like technology, like it's great, and like I want it in my business. You know, now it is absolutely at the place where it's just there. I mean, it's just unquestioned. It's no one saying it's great or it's not great. So Kaylee, like, that wasn't a topic of conversation, but it wasn't a topic of conversation because it's so ingrained in what we do now. It was a question of, what are you investing in? You know, how does it fit, et cetera. So the conversation has matured to the level of, you know, you need to be doing more with technology and how to make the most of it. So, yeah, I mean, I think that underlined, Kelsey, that underlined what you're saying, but you know, no one was as explicit as saying, we care about this, it has staying power, because everyone there just accepted that as fact.
And Ryan, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, of course, that you've been watching the freight tech space so closely for so long. It definitely seems like there are trends that happen that are really kind of emphasis for the freight tech scene. It seems like, you know, a few years back, transparency was the biggest thing, and it still is a mainstay here. And then it seems like it transitioned into being able to collaborate and really draw in as much data as possible. As we look into the next few years, do you see any overarching trend in the freight tech scene that's really going to start to be something that we're seeing pop up a lot more?
Yeah, data is still king. Right, Anthony, like that's unquestioned. And Kaylee, just so you don't feel bad, the chief commercial officer for Convoy, his name's Brooks, and I've been friends with him for a little while here, and I just kept calling him Grant all week last week. I would introduce him to people as Grant, so it's just kind of a thing that happens to me. I have these brain farts where I just call people the wrong name. So call me whatever you want from now on. But you know, listen. Data is still king. And so the trend for probably 20 years, it's been, let's get as much data as we can. Let's just throw it on people and let them figure it out. They're overwhelmed by data. So now the trend is really, and what I'm looking forward toward is what we would refer to as assistance with decisioning. So taking data, all of these data points, synthesizing them and presenting a user with a recommended path forward, or, you know, a decision to be verified. That's really where things are going. And that's, I think, the biggest kind of like forward-looking trend that's going to matter, because data is still at the center of every single conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So many people have so much data, but sometimes it's bad data or they don't know what to do with it. So I'm excited for that trend to really kind of take hold. And Ryan, always great having you on. Thank you so much for being here. If people want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, check me out on LinkedIn, Ryan Schreiber. I'm on Twitter at _userprime. You know, just I'm around. People can find me. I'm around.
Awesome, Ryan. Well, I hope you'll be around a little bit later on, and we'll continue to get this conversation going. But thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, see you guys next time.
Right now, we're going to head back to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix back with another weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. Continuing to talk about the expected winter storm, but this time moving up again into New England and the Northeast. And still going to be a pretty quick hitter, but still going to be fairly impactful for some of those areas. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We've got these forecast snowfall totals still up on the map. We can see areas of heaviest snowfall going to be centered really through the northern parts of the Appalachians up into eastern Pennsylvania, and then in through central New York up to upstate New York. And then again, Vermont into Maine going to get pretty slammed with some of the snowfall as well. Total snowfall amount is going to be heavier up here than what we're going to be seeing across the Midwest, looking at about 6 to 8, possibly a foot of snow in some of these spots. And with this, quick hitting but impactful. So we do have winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings in place already. Some of the snow is actually already happening. So we'll turn off the snowfall, turn on the radar. We can see pretty big swath all the way from Scranton, Pennsylvania, up through Albany into Vermont, and then up into Maine. Winter storm warnings in place. Further along the Philadelphia area and out towards the coast, you've got kind of a mixed precipitation going on with some ice and some sleet, and then down to some rain along those coastal areas. Coastal flood advisories in place for New Jersey right now, as this is going to bring some onshore flow up into the area. So some light flooding expected up there alongside that rain. Same thing as you move into the New York and Long Island area, looking at coastal flood advisories as well, expecting a high tide out of this too. So mainly the impacts to watch are going to be to that I-87 corridor, moving up eastern New York into the Albany area, and then up through I-91 through Vermont and into New Hampshire as well. These winter storm warnings in place through the afternoon hours today. And that snow will slowly start to rotate out and quit here throughout the evening hours tonight and into tomorrow morning. Again, overall impacts expected mostly going to be along those side streets and roads. Could see some impacts to the interstates as well, so just be careful out there if you are traveling at all these next few days or have any freight running up there these next few days. We'll talk about weather one more time before we're done here for the day. Right now, we'll take a quick break and be right back. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
What does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. I've got Thomas Wasson joining me from the other side of the wall, and right now we're hearing from you from the other side of the radio as well.
Exactly. I'm on work release today, so instead of this side of the wall, they let me out a little bit. But filling in for SiriusXM. So we have the FreightWaves Drive Time show on channel 146, Road Dog Trucking, and I'm filling in for Grace for Monday and Tuesday. But got a really cool guest list here, especially on Monday. Gonna have some folks from US Express talking about driver recruiting, AI Fleet, my old truck and tech startup. They're doing some moves, as well as Circle Logistics. Gonna have two guests from that. Pretty action-packed. Tuesday, still get hyped though. We're also going to have some folks, I think, from Newviz, as well as John Kingston. I got to get him scheduled, so don't worry. That'll totally happen. Wednesday, though, Grace is coming back. She's talking with Mary O'Connell, as well as Trucking Parking Club's Evan Shelley. So get hyped for that. Thursday is Grace as well. Mike Baudendistel and global trade expert Harish Mandir. And Friday, finally, is going to be Grace with Transfix Director of Carrier Ops, Justin Mays, and Ashley Watson, founder and president of National Women Minority Association in Transportation. Don't try to say all that in one word, folks. You will run out of breath like me on air. But it's a really fun show. We also get some callers and stuff. It's the only show I've noticed where a driver, you'll talk to a senior VP of a logistics company, and then a driver will call in saying, I can't get my tracking to work. And then the guys ask, which company did you book it with? Oh, this one. Oh, okay, they use this one. Make sure you fill this out. So it's super fun just getting the opportunity. It's 2 hours, though, so 5 to 7.
Yeah.
You know, you get your radio voices. If you ever hear me on air saying what time the weather is or stuff, that's when the wheels are spinning and the gears are grinding.
There you go. And I love the Sirius show, right? Because it's really accessible. You mentioned you have that senior VP leadership all the way down to your trucker who is actually driving, right? Your audience base is really, really large when it comes to the SiriusXM show. When you're coming for a caller, Thomas, what does your ideal caller sound like? Just calling in, the phone's ringing?
Yeah, if it's calling in, I was doing it Friday and I didn't have any guests and we had some callers. And so I was literally talking live to my producer because I don't get a lot of callers. So I was like, Gerard, throw them in. Wait, we got them. Did you put them in? Yeah, they're in. Because so when I'm doing the radio show, we've got the mic, we got the setup, but I also have in my ears, we have the people out in Nashville with Sirius. So you'll hear them giving you a heads up and prompt. And then sometimes what's humorous is just like a show like, FreightWaves Now, we have timers. It's like if you all are looking at me behind me, there is a counting down and I have to fill the void. So sometimes we'll mess up, and if you get nervous, they'll say minute out or 2 minutes out, and then I'll actually finish a minute early. And so we call that landing the plane, but it's such a fun thing. Radio is a different kind of vibe. So right now you're seeing me, you're hearing me articulate, you can see my body language. On radio, it is such a voice heavy. Mark Willis comes on before drive time. And so it's always fun. It gets me hyped up because I'm logging in, I'm hearing him finish. It's like, I'm gonna be a radio person one day.
Yeah, there you go. So when if people decide they want to either get on Sirius Drive Time to be a guest, or if they want to call in and have this interaction with some of your guests who are there, where do they go to do that? How easy is it for them to get in?
About as easy as calling 8888-ROAD-DOG, or let me see, we have the number here, 888-876-2336. They literally just call in. It's very much one of those things where it's as simple as that. When we bring guests on, they ask us questions like, what do I need to do? How do I log in? I just tell them call the number. So we have a VIP line that we call in. And you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes one guy ranted against the Hoover Dam, which was really fun. We do have a regular shout out to, his name is Big Fat Daddy. And he is a driver for a large carrier. He doesn't want his real name because he won't get in trouble. Yeah. And sometimes we'll get a little bit of commentary. You'll get regular callers as well. And it's fun because you just get this like from the ground up. Like we talk about a lot of things high level. We're 30,000 feet up. We're talking with, freight tech companies and executives. But sometimes you just need a driver to call and say, yeah, don't go off the I-80 truck stop. That place is all messed up. Or,
bring it back to reality.
Yeah,
right?
Just random things. It keeps you grounded. And it also kind of helps. To me, it provides a lot of value because, we're talking about a lot of these things, but it's also important to remember that there's, hundreds of thousands of drivers on the road. And the funniest part, the craziest part is you don't always know how many people you're talking to. Like Sirius has the data, but, you have to ask them. And so it's both amazing to think that going across the airwaves, you can reach tens of or hundreds of thousands of people. It's a very humbling experience.
Awesome, Thomas. Well, of course, we will catch him tonight and tomorrow on Road Dog Radio. That's Sirius channel 146. Of course, that's 5 to 7 drive time, Eastern time, and then it's rebroadcast at 11 in the evening. So if you missed the first one, tune in to the second one. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now right after this.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
what does this have to do with freight? Well, I'm glad you asked. People are wondering what's going to happen with inflation. Is there going to be hyperinflation? When is hyperinflation going to be here? When is there going to be inflation? What's going to happen with inflation? Inflation.
This is the sexiest topic within the economy right now.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our final check of the weather on your Monday morning. Shaping up to be a pretty active weather week across the majority of the United States, all the way from the desert Southwest up through the plains and then eventually into the Midwest and the Great Lakes area. We touched a little bit on the snow, but I also want to talk a little bit about the severe weather threat for the Gulf Coast areas that's going to be coming today and then on into tomorrow. So let's move right into the view in Sonar Critical Events. We've got the Storm Prediction Center issuing a couple of severe thunderstorm outlooks for today and tomorrow. We've got a day 1 severe weather outlook and then a day 2 severe weather outlook. That day 2 does include just the southeastern outskirts of the Houston metro, the Galveston area, and then in through the southern parts of Louisiana. So day 2, New Orleans into Mobile, Gulfport, Mississippi, Pensacola, Florida, you're looking at an enhanced risk of severe weather here as that front kind of slides along the coastal areas there, and we bring in some moisture, and then we have that forcing mechanism from the front. Going to be expecting some strong thunderstorms to pop up here, and with it we could be seeing the potential for some tornadoes in this threat. Mostly the threat is going to be the water spouts turning into tornadoes as they come on land and on shore, so that's going to be something to watch out for. Overall though, heavy rainfall, strong thunderstorms, high winds going to be an issue for those folks across the Gulf Coast area here the next few days. And again, tornado threat not zero, but mostly going to be in the form of any water spouts coming on land. Back further in the cold sector of that storm, we've got winter weather impacting the areas across West Texas into central Oklahoma. We are seeing some light flurries falling in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, but overall no accumulations there. We will be watching though some pretty hefty accumulations setting up across the West Texas Panhandle, then in through central Oklahoma, eventually making its way up, basically cutting the Great Plains and into the Midwest in half. St. Louis, Indianapolis, Indiana, going to be seeing those impacts here tonight, tomorrow, and then on into the middle of your week. Overall, accumulation is going to be pretty varied. Highest amount's going to be about 6 to 8 inches. Lowest amount's just going to be dustings in those grassy areas. We're going to watch it for developments on what happens later on this week. Right now, we're going to toss things over to Isaiah. He's got our final check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and Elon Musk is still getting backlash from a tweet that he put out over 4 years ago. He put out a tweet in 2018, and that tweet said, am considering taking Tesla private at $420 a share, funding secured. So right now, he's actually in court in the San Francisco federal court over this tweet. And really the main reason why is because all of the shares of Tesla were all over the place once he tweeted this out. The SEC even fined him and Tesla $20 million each after he put out these tweets. And so he had to pay them, that agency, $20 million. And then he even had his shareholders of Tesla file a class action lawsuit against him. So it's been a really bad couple of years just stemming from this one tweet that Musk put out in 2018. But he did say in court on Friday that it is hard to link Tesla stock prices to that tweet. He is hoping to beat that case, and we will continue to keep you updated on that as we continue to see where the case goes in the coming days. Now, switching things up, going to some entertainment news. Avatar: The Way of Water has passed more than $2 billion at the global box office. It is now the 6th film in history to do so. The other 5 include the original Avatar, Avengers Endgame, Titanic, Avengers Infinity War, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. So if you are a big movie fan like I am, you'll recognize that James Cameron also directed 2 of the other films that have grossed over $2 billion, that being the original Avatar and Titanic. So he has 3 of the 6 top grossing films in his repertoire. And now Zoe Saldana she has acted in 4 of the top 6 movies that have grossed over $2 billion, that being Avatar, Avatar: The Way of Water, Avengers Endgame, and Avengers Infinity War. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now I'm going to toss things over to Bill Priestley for our roundtable.
And welcome into the roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And of course, a couple of years ago, we had a rather large hiring spree in anticipation of a lot of demand that was entering the market, and a lot of capacity came with it. And now, 2 years later, we're hearing about layoffs from some of the big players in the industry. And just wanted to ask the question, were these layoffs avoidable? We got two people that can talk to that as well. Kevin Hill, good old friend of FreightWaves as well, partner at HK Analytica. And of course, here in studio with me is Anthony Smith, our lead economist. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Kevin, let me start with you here. This just put the question out there. Were these layoffs that we're seeing now, 10,000, 17,000 from Amazon, others along the way that have come in, Flexport most recently coming out with their announcement, were these layoffs avoidable?
You know, I think all layoffs are probably avoidable, and hindsight's 20/20 in the rearview mirror as well, Bill. So I think all the hiring came in a rush about a year ago, all in a quarter or maybe throughout 2022, for the first half of 2022. And they're all designed for an economy that came into existence around May of 2020 and went out of existence about the time a lot of the layoffs, a lot of the people were actually hired. I think a couple like Google and Meta maybe in the fourth quarter of 2021 hired 18,000, Amazon as well, 12 or 18,000 new positions, and those are about the size of layoffs now.
Yeah, Anthony, I think you may have even predicted this much earlier than that there as well. I remember Zach Strickland saying at one point, the demand here is unsustainable and there's no way we're going to be able to keep this many people employed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we're looking at, and of course, good morning to the amazing Kevin Hill. Great to see you. When we're looking at this overall event that happened in the labor market, we still haven't seen, I think, the full extent of where layoffs can and will go. I mean, we're looking at the overall total. When we look at the macroeconomy, I think we're starting to see that there's still a lot more upward movement. When we're looking at what happened throughout much of the ramp up, a lot of the jobs that were put out are artificial, and a lot of the job openings right now are still artificial. I mean, we're looking at the overall job openings number. I think the latest number is around 10.49 million and 10.48. That's still over 4 million available workers that we have to work those jobs. And this delta was even greater at a few quarters ago when it was over 11 million job openings. And all this demand for labor came from an artificial demand for goods that came from, of course, the stimulus packages and enhanced unemployment benefits that were deployed throughout the pandemic. And as Kevin mentioned, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but we do see that really one case led to the next case, led to the next case, and really a lot of the hiring that went on throughout much of the pandemic was done in almost like a panic hiring, as we saw panic buying throughout much of that time frame as well.
That dovetails beautifully to my next question here to Kevin. Let me just throw out a thesis and see if you agree with it or not. Dealing with, was this the right decision, especially for large carriers, to hire as much as they did? And of course, you have many different reasons for doing that. Obviously, you want to take advantage of the increased demand that we had a couple of years ago. But at the same time, maybe they're looking for more market share, especially as we saw smaller carriers perhaps go to the wayside as this thing was starting to subside, but no volumes, or at least not nearly the volumes that we had. So there really was not that much market share to be had if you were going to keep those workers all the way around. So in the end, was it the right decision? And I'm assuming the answer is no, but was it the right decision to make as many hires as they did at that time, given the information they had?
Given the information they had and the information I had, and I think about a year ago, Anthony and I made a call that 2022 is going to end up like this into 2023. So I just wanted to plug the forethought that Anthony and I had on FreightWaves Now about a year ago. But I think it was because with the information you had, I think it was the best decision because there was the opportunity to capitalize on it. And we live in a capitalistic society where when demand or capacity tightens, you hire to fill that need because you don't know how long it's going to go. So we don't have hindsight's perfect, foresight's far from perfect. But I think it was the right position because you chase the dollars as long as chasing the boom time. And when it busts, you reconfigure your business plan. So it's a harsh reality of capitalism, but it's a capitalistic system, and it's the best system around.
Anthony, let me switch that. That's the same kind of question, but slightly differently. If we were to see this kind of situation happen again, which is probably not going to happen, but if we were to see this decision again, what would we do differently?
So I think the first thing was that the mindset completely shifted throughout the labor market before, during, and after, and in the post-pandemic world, endemic, I should say. Before the pandemic, once it started really kind of ramping up, we saw that there was this need to just get rid of all labor. So you can see layoffs were just spiking throughout that time frame. Initial jobs claims were in the millions overnight, it seemed like. And so there was this different mindset. And so after all of these workers were let go, that mindset shifted once we saw a lot more pickup in activity, in economic activity, especially from those stimulus checks again. That mindset shifted to, okay, we need labor. And so I think a lot of companies, a lot of employers, that pendulum swung back into the hands of the employees to say, hey, I now have a choice. And then, of course, that led into the Great Resignation. But the mentality for hiring changed when we see the need for labor to, all right, we don't need as much labor. And we're seeing that pendulum swing back to the other way. So one of the things that happened, of course, was the option to work fully remotely. Now we're seeing that to hybrid. Now we're seeing a lot of executive officers saying, hey, you know what, this whole work remotely thing is not going to last. So we're seeing that pendulum swing back into the other way. And so I think this is just going to be the mindset. And I think if we saw this happen again, I think a lot more companies would have been a lot more hesitant to let go of so many employees, just because there's a lot of cost in hiring and then a lot of cost in training up those employees once again.
Yeah. Kevin, let me switch back to you in terms of, do you see any kind of backlash that might come back against these companies that have hired so much and then have had to let go so much? And I realize that may be just the cost of doing business, but would they see any backlash, say, for instance, even in the court of public opinion, because, hey, things have got to, quote, return to normal at some point. You didn't need to hire this much. Or perhaps even coming from shareholders watching all these employees go and the possibility of extended profits staying around?
I don't think so. I think there'll be a short-term kind of PR hit to all the firms, but I think the shareholders kind of demand this type of actions because they're interested in the quarterly numbers, quarterly profit. Long-term sustainability is another problem in there, and I don't think it really helps to hire a bunch of people, lay them off, go through maybe a short recession, maybe just a short blip. You never know, and then have to hire everybody back. And Anthony went through that. That's kind of what happened in 2020 is everyone shed jobs and then they had issues hiring talent back. I think you're going to have that same issue if this isn't a long drawn out recession or contracted period, however you want to call it. Not quite a recession yet, I suppose. But yeah, so it's going to be kind of the same thing all over. It's kind of one of those mistakes that companies make over and over again because of all the stakeholders involved.
Gotcha. Anthony, turning to you on kind of on those same lines, and just what Kevin said, in terms of the recovery, if the recovery from this wasn't so prolonged, if people weren't saying we're predicting that the recovery may come back Q2, Q3, maybe even Q4, if that was maybe, for instance, a more drastic, bottoming out and coming back, do you think we would see these layoffs coming at this particular point in time, or are they going to come off anyway just because of the normalization of the market?
I think they're definitely going to come off anyway, but I think the real threat here potentially would be, of course, I always talk about it, is that consumer debt really plaguing a lot of Americans that were spending like crazy throughout the pandemic because they had those additional funds, and then continued that spending habits as they got employed, and then maybe continued after they got a new job and got a little bit of a pay raise. And now we're seeing that savings rate really start to dwindle and credit card utilization just continue to rise. So I think one of the dangers of that continued layoff trend that we're seeing right now is these financially overextended consumers that are going to be, I think, starting to really mass up as we get throughout the end of, or the middle part of 2023.
Gotcha. Kevin, we've got about a minute left here. As we see, hopefully soon, a recovery to this, do you see companies still going back to the well and saying, all right, we're going to hire again? Or are they going to jump back into that boat again?
Though they definitely are. They're going to go out and hire aggressively because they're going to need to. Not quite as aggressively as they did in 2021. I mean, we had a booming economy, or what seemed like a booming economy and booming demand, as Zach pointed out, but it wasn't sustainable. I think it'd be a little bit more measured hiring unless some event unfolds that creates this extra demand overnight. But I think that's what's going to happen. They're going to go back to business as usual, and it's the boom-bust cycle of capitalism. And the economy will dictate the heat of the hiring and the heat of the layoffs too.
Anthony, real quick, you think they're going to do the same thing when we come back to business as usual?
I do think they'll start to hire, but I think it'll probably be a little bit more measured. But I think there will be out and about once that activity starts to pick up again.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And it's going to be an interesting thing to see how these companies, of course, deal with layoffs and then how they come back with hiring in the near term. We'll take a short break and be back right after this.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our final check of the headlines this morning. Recent announcements from East Coast ports show just how much ground they gained on West Coast ports during the pandemic. Sequential month-on-month volume slides are slowing, even in some of the hardest hit ports in the West. The Port of LA reported 352,046 TEUs handled in December, down 9% year over year, but up 15% from November for the highest monthly total since last August. Charleston and Virginia both saw single-digit month-on-month increases, while Savannah, Georgia Georgia was flat for December. However, each of those ports actually saw double-digit volume increases when compared to December of 2019, pre-pandemic. Ocean visibility provider Terminal 49 announced it has secured a $6.5 million Series A funding round led by Stage 2 Capital and Grand Venture Partners. The company is looking to ramp up its technology offerings to compete in real-time visibility. Company leaders say that supply chain professionals want more than just container tracking abilities. They want to be able to see problems ahead through an automated collaboration platform. Terminal 49 started out of a drayage trucking company in California, allowing them a quick in with all U.S. and Canadian ports early in the company's life cycle. Data integrations are coming soon with the Port of Southampton and the London Gateway terminals in the United Kingdom. And United Airlines reported earnings last week with cargo revenue topping $2 billion for the second time ever following a record 2021. The full year results were accomplished even with a weakening air cargo market to end last year, which dropped cargo sales 35% in the fourth quarter. Net income was stronger than expected at $843 million, including more than $472 million on the cargo side. Cargo revenue share of total revenue fell to 4.8%, with a total of $2.17 billion. And you can find those headlines and more up on FreightWaves.com and our FreightWaves app. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com to catch anything you might have missed from any TV offerings. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Thomas and Donnie for our final carrier update of the morning.
Welcome back to our final carrier update here on this fine Monday. Thomas Watson, joined by, of course, Donnie Gilbert. Donnie, it looks like we got a little bit of rate information.
Yeah, so we'll go over our lanes today here, starting with Memphis. Memphis, we saw a little bit tighter than what some of the other markets were. There has been an increase in rejection rates up to just over 13%. So pull up here, Memphis going to Kansas City. Of course, remember, click and turn your reefer on. And rates have come down from a peak, but they're still at $3.27 per mile. And this is for a 451-mile run. So for the length of haul, it's still a pretty good rate for this run now. Now, coming up here in a day or so, this lane's Havoc's going to wreck this lane with a storm.
Oh, yeah.
So you might want to increase these rates or talk to your shippers and make sure everybody's going to be open or closed, or the route's going to be okay when you run, when you look at a lane like this. Next chart, please. We got Memphis going down to Dallas. Again, we kind of came off a peak, but it's on the rebound here. 450-mile run again. $2.97. So still close to that $3. It's got a confidence score of 3, so that range is about 276 to 309. Again, Memphis and parts of those areas headed down to Dallas will again be affected by some of this weather that's coming through. So you might have the ability to go ahead and push these rates up because a lot of drivers will be avoiding them.
It's important with, especially coming in from a bid strategy. When you know there's volatility here, you know there's weather systems. Can you get away with trying to quote more towards the high, or are you still with this kind of soft market having to deal with the lows? And that's something that both carriers and brokers be paying close attention to.
As it gets closer and closer to those storms rolling in, I believe you're going to have a lot of carriers that just walk away. And that can tighten capacity up for that lane and allow you to go closer to the high or well above that high, depending on how bad does that shipper need that freight moved.
Yeah, it's not worth the risk for a $600 to $1,500 tow bill or a cargo claim, or if you ran, with icy road conditions. I think a lot of carriers, shippers and brokers don't know that, the reason they are not driving is from a safety standpoint.
Yeah, very, very, very true. All right, next lane here. Let's look at coming out of Fresno, California. Running all the way across the country with that reefer turned on. Rates have come down. You can see it's been a steady fall since October, really steady fall since probably back before August. But we bounced back during the fall there a little bit, and now we're down to $2.08 a mile. So that's a pretty tough lane. However, even though it is $2.08 a mile, it is it's almost 2,200 miles. And without having to stop and load and reload, where a normal 2,000 miles might have 4 different, being pick up and delivery 4 different times. So you can kind of make that money when you are pushing it, maybe over a weekend here and be pretty safe with this rate. But it is a little bit tougher to swallow when it's 208 instead of 308.
Exactly. The need for speed persists, especially in trucking. So there is a certain beauty to not stopping for things. That's going to be it, though, for this Carrier Update. Donnie, thank you so much. Of course, you can join us tomorrow. It'll be with Tony again. We're going to toss it back over to Kaylee and Anthony to wrap it up.
All right, guys, thanks for that. And we are done here for your Monday morning. Hopefully you had a good start to your week with us.
That's right, and the fun continues. In just about an hour, we'll have, of course, our flagship show with the one and only Tim Dooner. What the Truck will be coming up in just a few moments.
Of course, we've got the stock hit this afternoon also with Mike Baudendistel. You heard a little teaser of his CPG notes for today. And then the Drop Zone with Jack Dalio will be here this afternoon also. Anthony, if folks haven't gotten signed up for that Global Supply Chain Week, you still got about a month to do it. Where can they go?
That's right. You can go to live.freightwaves.com, get registered for that and all of our other virtual events as well, and start planning out for our next in-person event as well. That will be in Cleveland, Ohio.
Future Supply Chain coming up in just about 6 short months. We'll see you guys tomorrow morning starting live at 9. Have a great Monday.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch